Hello and welcome to part 10 of Bible Mandela Effects. If you're unfamiliar with Mandela Effects, I recommend you watch the other videos in the series to become familiar with the concept. We'll begin today talking about one of the most popular Bible verses, Jeremiah 29:11, and a lot of people recognize it out of the New International Version especially. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Very popular verse, and this is how I remember it growing up, hearing it a lot. And look at the King James Version. You see the other translations here as I scroll up. And notice the variations that we have. Okay, there are plans for good and not for disaster. New Living Translation to give you a future and a hope. English Standard Version, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Berean Study Bible, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not harm you, to give you a future and a hope. Now look at the King James Bible and notice how different it is as we read it. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. And as I've read that verse in the past, that sounds so different from what I remember. It just sounds strange. The thoughts that I think towards you sounds very awkward the way that that is stated. And then to give you an expected end sounds very different from to give you a hope and a future from the other verses, the Berean Study Bible. So as I was going through, I saw variation after variation, but they were very similar to the NIV, hope and a future. And then as I got further down, the Brenton's Septuagint translation, and I will devise for you a device of peace, not evil, to bestow upon you these good things. That even sounded different. Dewey Ream's Bible, for I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of affliction, to give you an end and patience. I just see so many different variations that this verse was intriguing to me. So I wanted to go back to the original Greek to see what it says. This is what it looks like in the original Greek. And I will devise for you a device of peace and not evils, to give you these things. And if you look at each of the individual words, that's what pretty much it says, that God will do something that will bring about a device of peace. For I know the plans. That's where we get the word device. The idea that God is putting something in motion. He is reasoning. He is thinking. Putting it into motion. Okay. A device of peace and not evils. So that one is a Mandela effect to me, simply because as I read the verse coming from King James Bible in my childhood, to me, thoughts that I think sound strange, and it doesn't even match the way the flow of even the original Greek goes, and to give you an expected end compared to the original Greek. Here it says to give you these things. In other words, the ideas that God has plans to put in motion things of peace and not evil, and to give us these things. So an expected end in the King James Version just sounded strange to me. So that's why I look at this as a Mandela effect. The King James Version just flows and sounds different than any of the other translations. Next, I wanted to talk about 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7. Very simple verse. For we live by faith, not by sight. And I remember, like the English Standard Version, for we walk by faith, not by sight. Now look at the King James Version. Okay, modern day, what do we notice? For we walk by faith, not by sight, smiley face emoji in modern day. Never noticed that. Now, back when I was a child, we didn't have emojis, didn't even know what they were. But here we see an emoji, smiley face, with it in parentheses. Notice no other translation has it in parentheses. Now, as we scroll down, American Standard Version, if we walk by faith, not by sight, with the parentheses closed, then we have the semicolon afterwards. If the semicolon come before, it would be a wink emoji. Don't see that. And then the Dewey Reams Bible, we have a period and then the parentheses closed. But it's interesting to me, the King James Version, that we actually have the smiley face emoji. So looking at the original Greek, by belief, for we walk. In other words, for by belief we walk. We walk by faith and not by sight. So here we see the brackets, which implies maybe parentheses, but again, I don't remember the parentheses, and I certainly don't remember the smiley face emoji, and the colon at the end of it just seems strange. Nothing in the Greek to me shows that it should be there. If we read the verse before and after here, therefore we are always confident, although we know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident then, and we prefer to be away from the body at home with the Lord. So even the concept of having the colon and then the parentheses just seems strange, and grammatically just looks strange. But to see the smiley face emoji there, just bizarre in the modern day world. So again, that's why it's a Mandela effect. All of a sudden there's something there that we don't remember. And now I want to show a Mandela effect that's not a Mandela effect. This one is very interesting. Exodus 22, verse 6. Just reading out of the New International Version. If a fire breaks out and spreads into thorn bushes so that it burns shocks of grain or standing grain or the whole field, the one who started the fire must make restitution. Look at the verse in the King James. If a fire break out and catch in thorns so that the stacks of corn or the standing corn or the field be consumed therewith, he that kindleth the fire shall surely make restitution. And at first I saw the word corn and thought, corn? There wasn't corn in the Old Testament times in ancient Israel and the Middle East. Corn didn't come about. In doing research, corn didn't come about until the colonists came to the Americas and found corn in the Americas. The indigenous people introduced them to corn, and that's where it came from. So at first I saw this and thought, there is no way that corn would be in ancient times in the book of Exodus. And there's many verses in the Old Testament. I'm just using this as an example. There's many Old Testament verses that have corn in it. So at first I thought Mandela effect. But then when I started to read, we know that words change over time. And in doing research, I found out that the word corn in ancient times had always meant grain. Corn was another word for grain. Then, when the original colonists came to the Americas, they discovered what the indigenous people had. They called it corn because that was the word that they had, just a word meaning grain in general, wheat, rye, any type of grain. And then over time, the word originally was maize in the Indian Common Language. Then the colonists adopted the word corn to mean what the Indians had given them and used grain for what had been corn to them for all sorts of grains besides what the Indians had. So in trying to explain this, the word corn had always been used to mean grain in the past, but then the word changed to just mean what we consider to be corn in modern day. So that's why when we see the word corn in the Old Testament, it looks strange to us. We immediately think of corn the way we know it today, but in 1611, the way they would have used that word in making the King James Bible, they were referring to grain. And that's why in these other translations, New King James, you see the word grain everywhere. In more modern terms, grain is what they were talking about. But in 1611, they would have used the word corn, meaning any type of grain. And then when they came to the Americas and found what the native Americans had, they would have used that word to mean corn, and that word gradually came about to be corn as we know today, and the word grain is what would have come about later. Hope that makes sense, but I wanted to show this as sometimes things that look like Mandela effects, there might be an explanation. As we go through this series, anything that I see that there might be another reason for, I'll explain it too. But I wanted to show an example of what appears to be a Mandela effect, but it's actually not a Mandela effect. Just wanted to show it to you. Hope it makes sense. Have a good day.